Welcome back to another episode of the Outsider Sports Baseball Podcast. Corey, Jason, Dylan, Mel, off-season baseball. Couple weeks away from, that awful, terrible thing that happened. We don't need to talk about it anymore.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
All looking forward to 2025 and who's going to be on those rosters. And I really want to start this off with the NL West because there's one team in the West that really is trying to get hard over that hump, and that's the Padres. They're going to be the mystery team. They're going to be involved on every free agent. And I do want to say before we talk about teams, Juan Soto is a fit for every team. Every team pretty much should be in on him. So it doesn't really make sense to mention him as a fit for...
Well, I don't think he is a fit for the Padres. I think that's why they moved off of him, because they couldn't pay him. I think we know that there's a certain contract that the Padres can't give out, and it's Juan Soto money.
Fair, but I mean, how many teams can pay Juan Soto money? Nobody's ever done it.
Yeah.
Even that weird Ohtani contract, that's not a $700 million contract. That's a $450 million contract that due to, the deferrals, interest puts it over 700, but he didn't sign for 700 million. He signed for 450 over time. That's a caveat that people always look past because they're like, he's not going to make more than Ohtani. He's going to make a lot more than Ohtani. A lot more.
Mm-hmm.
But the Padres are losing some guys. They're losing Jerkson Profar, Ben's favorite. Shortstop Hassan Kim. Tanner Scott, the reliever who they traded for. Starting pitcher Martin Perez. Donovan Solano, the utility guy. Kyle Higashioka. Elias Diaz, a couple catchers. Outfielder David Peralta, shortstop Nick Ahmed. They need some outfield, some starters, some catchers. Mind you, Musgrove is out all of 2025 with Tommy John. So there's a bunch of names out there that could fit for the Padres. They need a catcher, I think, more than anything because they just don't have one.
Yeah.
I mean, it just makes sense in a weak catcher market to bring back Higashioka, right?
Yeah, I think if they can, they certainly should. He showed a lot of pop this year in San Diego. He fits pretty well in their lineup. I would imagine that's a reunion they're on board for.
Anybody else out there that kind of sticks out to you and you're like, that's a Padre, or that's somebody the Padres should really go after?
So I think somebody the Padres should heavily target is Willy Adames. I know that a lot of people are just kind of writing him to the Dodgers at this point, and we'll talk about that fit in a couple of minutes. But this team also needs a potential shortstop with a potential loss of Ha-Seong Kim. To take a bat like Willy Adames, add him to the lineup, could be very strong to compete with LA. And then you're also potentially taking this guy away from the Dodgers. Obviously, San Diego, Los Angeles, not too far apart. And if I'm going to be honest, with LA traffic, I'd rather just live in San Diego. They got nicer beaches anyway. But I think that is a real name to look out for. Obviously, they moved off of Juan Soto last winter because they knew that they couldn't pay up the contract that he was going to need. But I think they can pretty goodly afford the, Adames contract. The thing is, like you mentioned with Musgrove, do they bring out the Bucks for a shortstop, or do they kind of just try and play the field of let's get a Jerkson Profar at shortstop? A guy that they could bring in and get to a higher level.
It's just funny that, we're talking about the Padres needing a shortstop because the joke kind of was that their roster was made out of all shortstops. Like, if you think about it, you have Manny Machado, who was a shortstop. Xander Bogaerts was a shortstop. Jake Cronenworth was a shortstop. Fernando Tatis Jr. was a shortstop. I mean, Jackson Merrill played shortstop.
And, I mean, you could theoretically move one of those guys back, right? Say that you got a Santander. You could move Tatis back to shortstop and call it a day. That's one of the beauties of having these versatile players. But if they were to target shortstop, I do think Adames makes a lot of sense. Again, taking him away from the Dodgers, taking him away from the Giants, who I think will be buyers in this market. That is a big splash move. Like you said, the Padres are going to be a sneaky team, and they're going to take somebody from someone. I think Adames could be that guy.
They just really want to get over that hump that they've kind of plateaued at. I mean, they had a fantastic postseason series against the Dodgers.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most entertaining.
I think if they won that series too, they would have won the World Series, truthfully.
Yes, and they have so much talent that they just can't waste it. A lot of young talent. The next team, though, I want to talk about the Diamondbacks. They were just, a season removed from being in the World Series. They're losing Josh Bell, Christian Walker, a couple first basemen, designated hitter Jock Peterson, and a reliever in Paul Sewald. So they do need a first baseman. They do need reliever help. Their roster doesn't have too many holes that they're going to look to fill, especially exercising that option on Eugenio Suarez. But they do have one big question mark, and that's what they do with Jordan Montgomery.
Yeah, I think Montgomery's a solid piece, and again, I think you brought him in to go forward with him. We'll see if they do that, just because they are pretty solid at the starting pitching spot. Maybe they want to divvy up their money elsewhere. Their lineup didn't produce this year the way that it did, obviously, in the World Series run. And if you want to bring back a Christian Walker, you're going to have to shell out some cash. Are you willing to lose an arm in Montgomery to do so? That's what you have to ask yourself.
I think they are because I think that relationship is not dead, but pretty strained, if not almost severed.
Mhm.
Ownership is not happy. Montgomery doesn't seem like he's happy there anymore. This was a lot of Scott Boras doing.
Yeah.
How do you view Montgomery's trade value? 1 year, I believe, like 22 million around that.
I I think he's more valuable at the deadline, truthfully, if they could work some things out until then, just because I think a lot of teams feel happy with what they have arms wise when they get into the season. I just can't imagine. I would imagine if you could hold off until that July deadline, when you find a contending team that is missing an arm or two, you could get more out of them as they try to make a push rather than a team that's going into spring training with some young promising prospects that just wants to see what they have rather than move on to a guy who isn't an ace of a staff by any means and is only
Right.
on a 1 year rental deal.
So we'll see what they do. They're a team that's in a weird spot because there are, at the very least, two, if not possibly three teams better than them in their division.
Mhm.
So they can't just, business as usual. They do need to kind of try to advance and go forward and build bigger.
Yeah.
So the only team that I'm kind of writing off already for the 2025 season is the Rockies. They're losing
That's a fair write off.
they're losing Daniel Bard, the reliever, and Jacob Stallings, the catcher. Stallings is almost a headliner in this catcher market, him and Kyle Higashioka, now that Travis d'Arnaud signed with the Angels.
Yep.
But they need everything. They just don't have, like, really anything good, overall. Their pitching isn't great. They don't really have a great bullpen. I mean, obviously, there's prospects. They just, selected the contract of Zach Veen. They're one of their top prospects who I really do like, but it's just not enough. Charlie Blackmon retired. So that one connection to the old, half decent Rocky guard is gone. And then they have one kind of good trade piece in Ezekiel Tovar, who they've, extended through 2030, who they could get something decent back. But is this not treading the same Tulo Waters or even Trevor Story?
I mean, they need to go full Baltimore Orioles a couple of years ago, where it's just young, young, young prospect, 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 and then they could get something going. I think this is a team that in the free agency market gives out some money to maybe some veteran players, and it could be something to look at for your fantasy baseball teams just because of the pop that's at that park. If they brought in a Josh Bell to play first base, like, hey, switch hitter, friendly park, maybe that's a guy you draft, but
CJ Cron
ultimately,
White?
yeah, and ultimately with the Rockies, there's not a lot of young free agents. Obviously, you don't see that often in the MLB. In the outfield, obviously, Soto's 26, but they're not in that race. The next is 28-year-old Eloy Jimenez. Maybe they make a push for him. Wasn't exactly a primetime player last year, but a guy that you could potentially bring in and see if you could develop him in Colorado. But yeah, in that NL West with the Padres, as good as they are, the Dodgers coming off of that World Series, the Giants going to be heavy buyers. I think the Rockies would be better served just kind of not tanking, but embracing the rebuild and getting as much young assets as they can.
How much do you think Chris Bryant hates his decision making?
I think 0, honestly. I just can't believe when he took that contract, he was like, "I'm gonna win a World Series." I think he got his World Series in Chicago and was like, "I'd like to live in Colorado. I'd like to make a, crap ton of money. Let me go get it."
I mean, the Rockies don't shy away from paying people either.
And I think that Bryant's, one of those trade candidates.
Yeah,
This is a guy who could play the outfield and third base. It's tough with that salary to move him, but again, I think he's a potential trade deadline guy to look at. I don't think he has high value at this point in the season, but if you see a team that is struggling at third base due to an injury and they need to go get a guy to make a World Series push, like that's where Colorado could capitalize on the value of Chris Bryant, a guy who's been there before, a guy who's still a decent hitter, and you could put him in the lineup.
he's somebody I know. Everything goes back to the Yankees, but I just love his fit with the Yankees,
I
especially if
just don't see them committing that money to him.
that's what I'm
But
saying. That's
if
the
there's an
money.
injury,
If the money's the issue, but maybe they can work out something like the Cardinals did with Nolan Arenado, where somehow, some way, the Rockies still paid most of that contract.
yeah, I mean, there's always ways around it for sure. It's just the more money you have somebody paying the contract, the better the prospect you got to give them. What
True.
level prospect are you willing to give up for Chris Bryant is what you'd have to ask yourself if you were a fan of a contending team. And ultimately, that's why, again, I think the value's higher at the deadline when,
Right.
all the chips, all the cards are down and you need to make that last minute push. I think if the Astros lose Bregman, that could be something where maybe Bryant ends up there before the season, but that's about it.
The other trade target though is Ezekiel Tovar, and that's a very team friendly contract. It's just long.
Mhm.
I wonder if they do look to move him because they haven't indicated that they're shopping him, but he could definitely speed up what is a long, lengthy rebuild.
Yeah, you have to imagine everybody on the Rockies has a price.
Next up, though, is the San Francisco Giants. They've been big game hunting the last few years. They've come up empty. They're losing Blake Snell, the starter, Michael Conforto, the left fielder, and Mark Canha, a couple former Met outfielders, Kurt Casale, the catcher. They're missing a superstar. That's what they want to really put this team into strong contention. They need an outfielder, shortstop, starting pitchers with Snell now hitting the market. I do think they try to re-sign him. But like you said earlier, I love Willie Adamas's fit here.
Mhm.
And he might be the biggest star that they could get.
Yeah, I could see them going to Damas. I could see Ha-Sung Kim switching teams in this NL West and just going to San Francisco, staying in California, staying on that West Coast timeline. I think they could be in the market potentially for Christian Walker, although if memory serves correct, they're like pretty decently set at first base over there. When I look at the outfielders, a Tyler O'Neill, certainly an interesting name to look out for. Anthony Santander, Teoscar Hernandez, for the past however many seasons, this team has been looking to spend their money. They've been looking to go out and get a free agent that they can believe in, whether it is one of those outfielders that I mentioned, Jock Peterson as a DH. I could see him landing back there, JD Martinez. Corbin Burns as a pitcher, Max Fried. I would be shocked if the Giants left this free agency without two notable signings. Maybe they're not both big splash signings, but without two notable signings, I'd be pretty shocked.
I honestly really like them for Roki Sasaki. Big
Yep.
market, big need. He gets to do that West Coast, bias that a lot of the Japanese players like. I think it could work out well. He'll, get to face Otani and Yamamoto quite often, so they get to have that story. And it's not an unmarketable place in San Francisco, too.
No, for sure not.
So I kind of like that. I just think that this isn't a great big name class for them because you really just have Soto.
Yeah, I mean, you could theoretically be in on Pete Alonso and Bregman if you're them. I'm just, I have a hard time believing Pete leaves the Mets. truthfully. But
Me too.
again, if they wanted to bring in a big name and the Mets got swept up in Soto stuff, I could see it.
So next up, last in the NL West, the reigning World Series champions, Los Angeles Dodgers. They're losing as of right now, Teoscar Hernandez, the outfielder, a couple starters in Jack Flaherty, Walker Buehler, a couple relievers in Blake Trinan, Joe Kelly. Kike Hernandez is still now on the market. They need starting pitching depth. We saw what happened to them, but Glass now and Kershaw and just Gonsolin and everybody going down. They need it. They need a corner outfielder to pair with Andy Pages and Mookie Betts. They need relievers. Although I do think Trinan is just a no-brainer to resign. And honestly, I think one of Flaherty and Bueller go back too. I don't think both do, but I think one.
Yeah, I would imagine Bueller. I've seen some off-season podcasts that he's been on, and he seems pretty close with the team. I think Flaherty would even potentially take a team-friendly deal. I'm not putting it past them to get both of those guys back.
I mean, I think I know they're meeting with Soto, but I just don't see the fit necessarily there. I
I
just think
mean, he's one soda. You'd fit
he's one,
him.
so of course you make him fit, but it's a lot harder to make him fit for them, especially with how that chemistry of that team is. I
Yeah.
think bringing back a Teoscar Hernandez or even a
I mean, I don't
Santander to
know if it's
play,
too hard to get an outfield of Mookie in left, Edman in center, and Soto in right, and you kind of just live with the defense out there.
I think you live with the defense, but like that's just the rich getting richer. I just don't
Oh,
see that.
yeah, I mean, I think anybody that's not a Dodgers fan that's their worst nightmare to see the Jeff
But
Passan
like
notification come in.
I think he would have to blow the Dodgers would have to blow out every other team for Soto to do that
Yeah.
because I don't think Soto wants the West Coast generally. Even going back to his Nationals days, it always seemed like he wanted East Coast, New York specifically.
Yeah, I think we've talked about Soto at length. New York seems like where he's going to go. The Dodgers would be crazy to not put in an offer, but
Right.
ultimately, I think they have to go somewhere else.
And I know Willie Adames has been connected a lot to them. They do need a shortstop. But I also like Santander's fit, replacing Teoscar in left field. I
Hmm.
think he's somebody who, although I don't love his long-term projections in the league, I think that's a signing the Dodgers can afford to make because if it doesn't work out, they have somebody that'll step up right away. They can afford to make stupid, splashy decisions. And then going even to Roki Sasaki, I've heard a lot of reports now that he doesn't want to go to the Dodgers because he doesn't want to be in the shadow of Otani and Yamamoto.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. You want to be your own man and you just kind of be part of a collective on that team. I had this sneaky idea for the Dodgers that I kind of wanted to run past you and get your thoughts on.
Let's hear it.
It's been rumored that the team is potentially considering shopping Gavin Lux. Do you think there's a world where the team moves on from Lux and Glaber Torres ends up in LA? You could have Edmund play shortstop and you could bring in Harrison Bader to play center fielder, flip flop it and bring
Yeah,
in another shortstop piece. I just think Glaber in LA would fit great for their lineup, a guy who in New York was being asked to be a leadoff hitter and produce consistently, which he did in the playoffs. But we know as Yankees fans that Glaber for a full 162 isn't an all-star caliber player. But you fit Glaber into a 7-8-9 role in a Dodgers lineup, and when he's on, how do you beat that team?
on paper, that really does sound like a great move for the Dodgers, and that's something that they can afford to pay
Yeah,
Glaber, live with the defense. They have the team to rebound. I just don't know if Glaber would do it.
I it's interesting because Glaber clearly wants to stay on the Yankees.
He wants to be a Yankee, so I think he would take a more team-friendly deal to stay.
I do too. I don't know if the Yankees can sacrifice the infield defense the way that the Dodgers maybe could get away with.
I think if the Yankees can hear me out, obviously Soto is the top of the list. You bring back Soto, him and Glaber are now really tight. Glaber comes back on a team-friendly deal, and you can get like a Christian Walker to play first base.
Yeah, no, I get it, the
He's
path for the Yankees. I just in a world where Glaber's not a Yankee, the Dodgers make a lot of sense for
the
me.
Dodgers do. I've always viewed Gleyber as somebody whose career will just toil away in Miami, or he'll go to the Red Sox.
I think he likes to be on a winning team. Like, I
He
think he would
does.
take team friendly to be in LA as well.
Yeah, he's definitely not a guy that I see who would go out there and just go for the biggest contract. He's not gonna be a
A
Chris Bryant who will go to Colorado and
and
just get the bag.
I'll tell you what, if they wanted to bring in Soto, hey, we'll sign him with you, kind of a Giannis Thanasis Antetokounmpo situation. We'll spend the money on Glaber if you need him here.
I mean, would you not just sign up for that if it meant keeping Soto?
Oh, I would as a Yankees fan, but if you're the Dodgers and you thought signing Glaber
It
just
would
gave you a
bring
shot at Soto,
Yep,
would you not just sign Glaber?
but then, like, the last time we saw that in baseball was when the White Sox signed Yasmani Grandal because he was Manny Machado's brother-in-law.
I have a feeling the Dodgers would be a little bit better run to ensure that
Yes,
they got both.
but that would be really interesting. It's just the Dodgers are so good, they have so much depth. I mean, they lost, like, 5 starting pitchers and still had a great rotation. But again, we saw that the Yankees had a trade possibly in place for Jack Flaherty with the Tigers, but they couldn't pull the trigger due to his medicals. The Dodgers had the depth where they can afford to make that risky move. Although we both know for the Yankees that his arm would have fell off as soon as they got him. He never would have lasted.
Yeah.
But it just shows the difference between what the Dodgers are and how they're run because I think that they have so much more room because I
I mean,
don't
if they got Soto, he'd be a Gold Glove second baseman somehow. Or not Soto, Glaber.
Yes. But also, like, I think there's so much more room for the Dodgers to grow because I don't think they're a well-managed team. I don't think they're a well-coached team. I
You
just
and
think they're
Ben
some
really
talent.
don't like Dave Roberts. I gotta be honest, I thought he did really well this postseason. I thought especially the way he managed his bullpen in that Met series to where
Yes.
hitters were not seeing the same bullpen arms. And, you know, sure, he kind of punted a game versus the Yankees, but it clearly didn't even matter.
No, it didn't, but, like, I he did do the bullpen well versus the Mets. I just really just don't like how he runs his team. I just don't think he's a very good manager. I think a lot of the decisions
I think he is very similar to Boone, and he's a
that's
player's
exactly what
manager.
I was gonna lead to next. Players manager, he's not the decision maker. Everything comes from upstairs. There's not too many managers left.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
Bruce
fair.
Bochy would be one of them. There's just
That's a
not
fair
many,
critique.
and I just think that those are the types of managers you'll never have a good feeling with because they're not a difference maker. They're there
Yeah.
to shield the players from the media, keep the locker room happy. But let's now flip it to the American League West, and I wanna start it off with the Astros because they were kinda like the dynasty before the Dodgers are establishing themselves. They're losing Justin Verlander, Alex Bregman, Yusei Kikuchi, Kendall Graveman, Jason Hayward, Jose Urquidy, Caleb Ferguson, Ben Gamel, Hector Neris. That's a lot of guys that are just, hitting the free agent market, and they need a first base now. They need some starting pitching. They need third base if they don't bring back Bregman, and I don't think they will. I think he's gonna hit the market. I think that 2017, asterisk Astros stench is kind of finally leaving them. The more
Mhm.
players leave, it'll never be fully gone, especially while Altuve's on the roster. But I think like Correa and Springer, Bregman needs to kind of just go off on his own and reestablish himself. But first base is going to be the big question because they're going to be in on an Alonso. They're going to be in on a Paul Goldschmidt or a Christian Walker. And to those teams that need a first baseman, this is going to be their biggest opponent because that's their biggest need.
Yeah. This team to me screams Carlos Santana. I think Santana's a really great fit in Houston. I think he'd fit well in their lineup, and I think it's a guy that fits what they like to do. A good, solid, consistent hitter. They can get him on kind of a cheaper deal because I think, like you mentioned, they need a couple of things. They need third base. They need starting pitching. Yes, first base is a big need, but if they're going to be back in that World Series consideration, they need both corner infielders. They could be losing, one of the better players of their team's history in the last 2 decades, and Alex Bregman. I think they'll prioritize paying Bregman and keeping him around if they can do that over first base. I think this is a sneaky team to watch for one of those starting pitchers. You mentioned them losing Verlander and losing Kikuchi. I think they're in on a Shane Bieber. I think they're in on a Max Fried. I don't know if they're in all the way up to a Corbin Burns, but it's the Astros, man. I wouldn't be shocked.
On Justin Verlander front, do you think? I think there's only two teams. I think it's either a return to the Astros or he goes back to Detroit. It's either those two or retirement for him. I just don't see him going anywhere else. He tried that with the Mets and it didn't work out. I think he's just going to go where he's comfortable.
I think I think a return to the Astros as kind of a sixth arm on a cheap deal and then a little bit of a retirement tour makes a lot of sense. But I don't even think he's going to be a productive player at this point in time. I think it's very what we saw from Kershaw last year on the Dodgers. Maybe in a 162, he eats up innings, but this guy won't be starting postseason games anymore.
Then even with like your Quiddy, they have a lot of holes. I have a sneaking suspicion that the Astros could pull off the Cardinals corner infield, trade for Arenado, sign Goldschmidt, and they return to form as Silver Slugger All Star caliber players, because that would be the most Astro thing possible.
I think that's certainly an outcome there. Goldschmidt is certainly an interesting name to watch. It really depends internally. Are the Astros trying to give it one more run of a 2 to 3 year window, or are they trying to build a bridge of young players and more veteran players and kind of bridge that gap to be let's be great for a long period of time? Because they do have some younger players in Kyle Tucker and Jeremy Pena who are nice. Jordan's kind of in the prime of his career. Altuve, he'll still be a good hitter for a while now. Do they try and bridge that gap, or is it let's get a bunch of veterans and try and push through the AL again?
It's tough. I think that they see the state of the AL. The Yankees came out of it, and we both feel like the Yankees weren't the strongest team that they've had, but they were still the best in the AL, but they were a very beatable team.
Yeah.
And they see that and they think, why can't we run it back for another 2 or 3 seasons?
That's
And,
how I would approach things if I was the Astros. I
and
think the
then
core is strong enough that if you just hit on a couple vets, I'm looking at the free agent list here. If they brought in even just a Carlos Santana and a Yoan Moncada and got two decent starting pitching arms, like why not the Astros to represent the AL
yeah,
next year, even with just that?
and I think even bringing back a Verlander as your sixth arm, trying to bring back your Quiddy, who's also a very good player,
Mhm.
running it back by just and fixing a couple holes. I'm still going to pencil them as
And
my
they got off to,
favorite.
like, a generationally slow start
Yeah,
last year, if you remember, like,
yeah.
the odds of that happening again for them aren't high. There's a very high probability this is a top 2 seed in the AL next year just from running it back and not starting off so slow.
So it's just going to be one of those things where it's a foundational decision. How do they move forward?
Yeah.
The next team I want to talk about is the A's. I want to call them Oakland. I want to call them Vegas. I want to call them Sacramento. They're the ATH A's. They're the Athletic A's. They don't have a hometown moniker. They're losing Ross Stripling, Alex Woods, Scott Alexander, Trevor Gott. I'll forgive you if you don't know or barely know any of those names because they're not losing anything of substance. They
Yeah.
need an MLB park. That's their biggest need, a home.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think the A's are doing fine by keeping their core of Rooker, Mason Miller, Zach Geloff, JP Sears. They could participate in free agency. I don't see them participating at a high level. I could see them bringing in, some veteran type players to get some run, a Paul DeJong, an Ahmed Rosario, a Josh Bell, Joey Gallo. Maybe they could splash all the way up to a Carlos Santana. But ultimately, I think that the A's front office is probably worried, like you said, about just becoming an MLB team with a stadium and park to play at.
Yeah, no, my question though would be, do you think there's a world where they trade Rooker or Miller and get a high return on their value? Because neither guy before last season had pretty big value. So
I
it's just interesting to me if they capitalize at the height instead of waiting for him to fall off.
I think it's possible. I wouldn't say it's likely. Um, you know, you think about teams that could really use guys like Rooker or Miller, and it kind of depends. Well, how does free agency pan out? What's the team that loses out on Santander, Soto, and Hernandez? Are they willing to pivot and pay up big money for a Brent Rooker? You know what I mean? The Phillies, they're rumored to be in on Soto. They're rumored to be in on Santander. They're rumored to be in on Bregman. They're willing to move Bohm and other pieces. If they miss out, Rooker's a name that they were interested in at the deadline. I know John would jump for joy if they brought in a Mason Miller at closer. The Yankees, our team, if they lose out on a Tanner Scott, what are they willing to pay to get a Mason Miller? I think that those two guys hold really strong value going into the season and at the deadline. The only thing is, it seems like the A's were not really fielding offers. They had to be blown away at the deadline if they were willing to move them. Now, is that because they want to take their time this offseason? Maybe. But maybe it's just because they want to build around these guys. They're young enough. I wouldn't blame them for keeping with them.
I don't know. I think we might see one of them moved just because the A's don't really
Who do you
have.
think's more likely if it is one of them?
I think Miller's more likely than Rooker, just because the life of a reliever can change on a dime. Like he was a nothing really player until last year.
Yeah, and
Who's
how
to say
many
he can
wins
run
are they going to be
it back?
closing out?
Right. So why not get, let's say if it's the Yankees, right? Why not get like a Spencer Jones who they can pretty much start right away? They can get a Hampton. They can really get almost anybody they want from the Yankee system
Yeah.
for a Mason Miller, and we'll say thank you and move on. Like it
Yeah.
almost doesn't even
I,
matter
I
what
think that's a
they got.
fair way to look at it too.
Like
Again, the
he's at the
value
height of
that
his
Mason Miller brings to the Athletics as a closer is kind of not as high as the value he would bring to a good baseball club.
right, and it's not a risk that the A's should be willing to take. That if he develops into something even more than he was, because I mean they're not going to be competitive for a while.
Yeah, I mean, how many wins are the Athletics going to be closing out, whether it's in Oakland,
Right.
Sacramento, or Vegas? Probably you're good to bet under 80.
So the fact that you have a closer that was great last year, you should move him at the height of his value instead of waiting for it to tumble. It's
Yeah, you,
like
you sold me on it. I think they should move him
they should move him. It just makes sense
because you
because
can get 2 to 3 prospects for Miller.
you can get 5 high-end prospects.
Yeah, I mean, if you get a bidding war going, I
Right,
say.
which I think there would be, and really only good teams can sacrifice doing that for a reliever because
I mean, if
they
the
need it.
Dodgers can't bring back Tryon,
Right, the Dodgers should be in on it, the Yankees, the Phillies, the Orioles, the Mets,
I
every
mean, I
team.
think the Mets are going to roll with Diaz. They
You
paid
I
him
know
all that
they should
money.
give him all that money, but to pair him with Diaz because they didn't have a great bullpen last year.
No, no,
The
no, it's fair, but then you're moving Diaz to set up.
Or I mean, you're
You know,
putting Miller at setup. He's got a lot of control, Miller too, more control than the Diaz contract itself,
yeah.
and then trying to set up that two-headed monster. Because remember, the
No, no, I think
Yankees.
it's fair. I'm just
Right,
when I think about it, I think you could get more assets from
right.
the other teams.
I'm saying the Mets will check in at the very least, though.
Oh, for sure.
Even Cleveland to try to pair him with Clase if they really
Stop
think
it.
that's the direction.
They don't. The Cleveland needs to focus on other areas than bullpen. It's the one spot that they should just be content with what they got.
Such a great pen. But there's a lot of teams that'll be in on him. I just don't know if the A's will be smart enough to make that move. Another team that I don't think is smart enough to make the right moves is the Angels.
I
They
gotta be
lost
honest. Every offseason, I feel like I like what the Angels do, but I just know because they're the Angels, it's not going to work out.
ever since Otani left. I was kind of done with believing in the Angels.
I believed in them even before. Like when they brought in Rendon, I thought that team's got pieces to go. They got things to do, and he's just been a disaster for them. It's so tough to blame for the front office because they're one of those teams when I see them make the moves, I'm like, that's a great move. And then it just
Yeah,
every time never fails to fail.
I remember when Rendon signed, I was on air doing my radio show in college, and I announced it because I saw it on Twitter as I was scrolling, and I said, Rendon to the Angels, and then I realized I got because it was a fake account, tweeting it out because people like to do that. I think it was Sports Talk Barry that got me,
Mm,
and then
back
about
up.
20 minutes later, it actually happened. So I didn't have to go on and apologize for getting got because it happened. It was just really funny that I got because I saw the account right after I did it. It was, I think it was
It was
I
one of
forget
those
who he
like
was.
fake pass accounts or something where they change their
Right,
profile picture and it's like Jeff Hassan or something.
right.
They like
Or
completely
Ken
mess it up. Yeah.
Rosenthal or something like that.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
So it was just really funny how I got with the Rendon news, and then he ended up signing with that same team about 20 minutes later.
Yeah.
So the Angels, though, they're losing Matt Moore, Brendan Drury, Kevin Pillar, Hunter Strickland. But they're like the only team that we're going to talk about today that made any moves in general. They're the only team that seems to have signed anybody.
Yep.
They brought in Travis d'Arnaud, the catcher, shortstop Kevin Newman, who I'm like half positive played for the Yankees in like April, and then Kyle Hendricks, the starter. So they're doing something, but they just have a lot more needs. Like they need to trade Mike Trout before he wastes his career away.
I think they're the team to look at for who is going to overpay for a Jack Flaherty, who is going to
Yeah.
overpay for a Nathan Eovaldi, a Sean Manaea off of what we saw at the end of last year. I also do, though, think that they're a sneaky option for Roki Sasaki. They obviously are the team that landed Ohtani in LA, California bias. If Sasaki truly does want to not play with Ohtani and Yamamoto because he wants to build a name for his own, but he wants to be on the West Coast, like the Angels have that advantage. And they desperately need pitching and should be willing to pay him. They were willing to pay Ohtani. He just didn't want to play for them because he knew he wasn't going to win there. So obviously they have money that they're willing to spend. Why not go get Roki Sasaki? And if you pair him with a Jack Flaherty, like there's a real staff there. I agree with you that Trout, with his injury history at this point, isn't going to be at a point where he can win with the Angels, but I just don't see them moving him unless he requests it.
And I think if he did request it, I feel like the Phillies would be the only real option because that's where he grew up. He grew up in the
Yeah,
Jersey side of Philly, grew up a big Phillies fan. He's a big Eagles guy for some reason.
for some reason.
I don't know why anybody would do that.
Who knows?
But I think moving Trout for nothing just to open that spot up. I'm usually pretty big on players should stay with the team that drafted them. I like, that
Yeah,
loyalty.
I
Feel like
think he
that,
should if he wants to. I think that team needs to respect whatever his wishes are
right.
at this
And
point.
they should. I just feel so bad for him because he's
I
tried
don't I don't
so
really feel
hard.
bad for him when he signed that extension. Like he had the opportunity to leave and said he wanted to stay. And granted, the
Respect
team
that.
had Ohtani at that point, and that's a pretty good selling piece. But you know, eh, you kind of made your bed with the Angels, and you're getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars to live in Los Angeles and you know play 60 baseball games a year. I don't feel too bad for
Yep.
you.
I'll always be happy to say that I saw the Yankees play the Angels and Trout and Ohtani were on the field at the same time.
Yeah,
It was a rare sight.
that's super cool for
It was a
sure.
rare sight
And
because
and I didn't want to sound like a Trout hater there. I'm just saying at this point in his career, you're getting at best 100 120 games on a good year. And when he's out there, sure he produces, but a team that trades for him, it feels like the price would be very high for a guy that you're 50-50 is going to be able to play for you in
yeah,
October.
like going into the season the last few years, really since Trout's rookie year, it felt like when the season started, he was just the automatic favorite for MVP in the AL. It was
Yep.
his award, and then somebody else had to beat him to it. Now, even if he's healthy, I don't even think he would be in the top 5 in consideration.
The AL is a little weak for MVP, so
It is, but
maybe. But Henderson and Witt are certainly emerging.
and it's Judge's award to lose every year now.
Yeah, and we'll see where
Henderson,
Soto
Witt,
ends up.
Soto would be one if he stays in the AL. Even Vlad Guerrero's somebody Julio Rodriguez,
he's somebody.
Julio
Vlad Guerrero
Rodriguez,
is somebody.
right? But like those are guys that are I would put more likely than Trout to win the MVP
Yeah, I guess.
among another names, which is it's a sad fall from grace.
Jose
But
Ramirez.
Jose Ramirez, of course. So there's a lot of guys I think now that have surpassed Trout, and it's sad to see it because injuries really did derail what could have been one of the greatest careers we'd ever seen.
Yeah, still a no doubt Hall of Famer.
Oh, without question. But the next team I want to talk about is the Rangers. They're one season removed from winning the World Series. Big down year last year. They're losing Max Scherzer, Nathan Eovaldi, Andrew Heaney, a couple starters, David Robertson, the reliever. They're losing, a
Jose
lot of guys.
Leclerc,
Andrew
Kirby
Chafin, Kirby
Yates.
Yates, Jose Leclerc, Travis Jankowski, Jose Urania, Chase Anderson, Carson Kelly. Just going down just a long list of guys that most likely will be no longer on their team.
Yeah,
I can
this
see a
is a
guy like
team that
yeah,
pitching.
I
That's
can
all
see
I
them
could think.
signing some of them,
Oh yeah. I
like
think Leclerc
Scherzer.
ends up back there.
Yeah,
I could see Scherzer back there, but I could see this team putting their cards on the table. Blake Snell, Corbin Burns, and paying them big money. Again,
yeah.
being in Texas without that income tax, like you don't have to pay as much as some of these other teams. And this is a team that desperately needs guys. Like I could see them getting Blake Snell. Pair that with a Luis Severino and see if he could stay hot. Maybe they're the team that lands Tanner Scott, losing probably their three best bullpen arms.
There's another direction though we could take the Rangers, and that's kind of the reset because they're not a young team,
Seager
and
back to the Dodgers.
so that's kind of where I'm getting at. Is I have this one friend who's a Met fan, and he's telling me that since the Yankees are missing out on Soto, he thinks it's '04 A-Rod all over again. The Rangers had no intention of paying that Corey Seager contract, and that the Yankees pivot when they lose Soto to the Mets will be trading for Corey Seager. And I wanted to
If
get your
we
thoughts on that.
if we dive down that rabbit hole, is Seager playing second, third,
Short. He would be playing short, and he'd be moving Volpe.
Volpe to second?
Or, however way you want to think about it, it doesn't really matter for this exercise.
I mean, it does.
Well,
I
think
mean,
about it from
because
every
in
different.
terms of the viability of the move, I-
Let's,
me and you have talked. I don't want to see Jazz at third next year. But if this move were to happen, that essentially locks Jazz into third. Whether you flip, Volpe and Seager, however you go about it,
unless you put
that's your
Seager
middle
third.
infield. If Seager's willing to play, like the best version of that is Seager third. I mean, you want to talk real for A-Rod. You're moving
Yeah,
the guy to third base
moving the
for
better defender at short to third base for your
for the
hometown
hometown
fan.
kid. Yeah, I'm just saying. And then Jazz to second. I mean, that's a great infield. And if you paired that with Christian Walker, they'd have the money to do it if they lost it on Soto. The Yankees need to have a contingency plan if they lose Soto. I think Seager's an interesting name to look out for if Texas decides to sell. I just don't think the Rangers are in sell mode. I, in fact, think that they're in buy mode now more than ever. I think this team loads up and sees Houston potentially on the verge of selling. And I think kind of the argument we made for Houston, the Rangers could be like, hey, we had a down year, but we just won the World Series 2 years ago. Why not us out of the AL?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a wide open West.
And they have great rookies in Evan Carter and Wyatt Langford that were producing last year. They have a top tier lineup that they don't even need to add to.
Yeah, they
It's
had a
just go
lot of
get
injuries last
pitching.
year. Go get pitching. They should be in on a Burns. Bring back some of the guys you lost. Eovaldi was great for them. They
Yeah,
should
I
look
mean, again, like they could get two of these top 8 pitchers and pair that with a Tanner Scott, and all of a sudden the Rangers could be favorites to come out of the AL.
trade for
Period.
Crochet, something like that.
Yeah, he's on the market. We could talk about him on the White Sox episode for sure. But I think, we talked about the athletic selling. Yeah, I think Crochet is a guy the White Sox should definitely sell.
So there's different directions the Rangers can go. I think selling wouldn't be the top choice, but I do think that there could be some self-reflection there in moving, one or two guys to really build it up.
Yeah.
But the last team I want to kind of go with is the Mariners, the team I'm the highest on in the AL West.
Yeah, the Mariners are kind of not I hate using the word second team because I don't have a second team, but I do find myself rooting for the Mariners and wanting to believe in them. I like Julio Rodriguez. I like the pitching staff they've built up. They just got to get that infield right, and they got to make sure they can play defense and hit.
So they're losing Justin Turner, the DH third baseman, Yimi Garcia as the reliever, Jorge Polanco second base. We've seen them make splashes before, trading away like a Kyle Lewis. You know, they got they we've seen them make moves, getting rid of what was it, Edwin Diaz when he first made it. A lot
Mhm.
of people now forgetting that he was like the Mariners guy.
Yeah.
Him and Robbie Cano to the Mets for Jared Kelnick. So they're not opposed to making splash trades out of nowhere, which is why I think we can see them trade away one of those big arms
Yeah,
in
I
order to
think that
build
that's
up their
certainly
young.
possible. I just don't know what bats are for sale, um, in a spot that they need off the top of my head in terms of infielders. Um,
I got an interesting one.
yeah, let's hear
The
it.
one I've seen a lot is them trading away Luis Castillo is the one I saw, and that would be
Probably,
to
he's a
the
little bit
Red Sox.
older.
And that would be to the Red Sox for a package centered around Jaron Duran.
Okay, I don't think that they need outfield. I know Duran could kind of just play baseball. He's just kind of a ball player. Um, me personally, would try and find something better. Um, I don't know anything off the top of my head right now. Nothing's jumping off the page in terms of teams that maybe be selling. You know, maybe they could go get Chris Bryant for a cheap price. We talked about him earlier in the
Yeah,
episode with the Rockies to play third base. I just think this is a team that if your favorite baseball club is in on Christian Walker, Pete Alonso, Gleyber Torres, Willie Adames, Alex Bregman, I think you're going to continuously see the Mariners name brought up, and they're going to try and pay for at least one of those guys. Um, I could see Pete Alonso going there again if the Mets were to get Soto and they pivot off of Pete for whatever reason. Maybe Cohen's like, hey, I got Soto, I don't need to open up the bank for Pete Alonso. The Mariners make a lot of sense. This is a lineup that needs some pop in it. We're talking about how great the pitching is, but you have to get a guy that could drive in the runs at the top of this lineup.
so before we kind of end it with the West here, if you had to make one big, bold prediction for any of the 10 teams we talked about, what would it be?
I think the bold prediction, I don't know how bold it is, but I think, yeah, a good prediction is the Padres get Adames. I think that's where I'm kind of at right now. I think the Padres snipe the Dodgers, snipe the Giants, and they land Adames and kind of close the gap a little bit on that NL West. I would also say, just as a prediction that maybe is bold to you, I think the Astros keep Bregman. You were kind of talking about it as if you were like very much so leaning he leaves.
I
I
am,
I
yeah.
I feel 70-30 that he stays.
All right. Well, that's going to do it here for us. Next one we're going to talk about will be the AL and NL Centrals. We're going to hold off on the East because I think Soto ends up in one of those two divisions. And they're talking
Hopefully
about
by the
now
time we
how,
record.
well, they're saying now he might, sign before the winter meetings, which is a little surprising to me because I thought he would sign during or right after.
Yeah, I
So
you
they
know,
gave kind of a date of around December 9th, more or less.
I do think obviously if somebody's made it this far in the episode, they're fine listening to a little Soto talk. I do think that Soto knows he is the free agency prize, and free agency doesn't start until Soto, and every team's kind of just going to give him the best offer in the next week or two. Like he, you know, by winter meetings, like he'll know. So it wouldn't surprise me if he was willing to make a decision. Like this is something that he's had a year to think about. I feel like in his mind, it's probably narrowed down to, me and you feel pretty strongly it's narrowed down to the Mets and the Yankees.
Yeah.
At this point, where do the numbers come in? That's kind of the feeling. To me, this feels very similar to what it was with Judge, where it was down to the Giants and the Yankees, and everybody kind of knew it. And then it was, can the Yankees get close enough to the other team's offer? If so, I'll stay. If not, I'll go.
I do think the Yankees having such a great relationship with Scott Boras over the years Scott Boris's other big free agent was Garrett Cole,
And Giancarlo Stan, they've
Giancarlo
continued to
Stanton.
pay. You know,
So I think that kind of helps. Not saying the Mets don't have any Boris guys, but those are some pretty big
the
names.
Yankees have been willing to play Boris's games over the years,
So I'm
which
hoping that
he
helps.
has an ego. We all know it.
And there won't be any deferred money on this Soto contract because Boris is an old man and he wants that money now. He won't get paid on deferrals until those get paid in.
Yeah, I
Those
also, Soto also wants the money. Soto
yeah,
doesn't have the advertisement money coming in that Otani does.
no, he doesn't. And he's also half a decade younger than Otani
Yeah,
too. So that'll do it here for us. Next week will be the Central divisions. Talk a little Cubs, a little
maybe
Brewers.
some of these lazy co-hosts will be back.
Yeah, we'll see. Probably not those guys. They're already checked out. They're already in the off-season mode.
This is
But
how we're
that'll
testing if they listen to the full episodes.
get that text. Hey, we're not lazy. We never get a text again. But that'll do it. Corey, Jason, Dylan, Mel, signing off.